You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتلمين هناك لشوارزنيجر.
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
It's a week to Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving. Can I have turkey too?
Oh, I for some reason I always like the American Thanksgiving more than the Canadian Thanksgiving. I don't know if it's because, well, I know it is because of the close proximity to Christmas and it starts the holiday festivities, but for some reason my turkey always tastes better in November than in October.
Yeah, perhaps. I'm also I'm not so much anymore, but I did grow up as a Dallas Cowboys fan, and I probably just lost subscribers when I said that. But now that they're hot again, obviously I've got to get back on that bandwagon, and they play on Thanksgiving Day every year. So that's kind of fun. Middle of Thursday, you get to go watch some football. I usually watch a lot of football in the middle of the week anyway, just the real kind, not the kind that the Americans play. I like American football too, though. So
you mean the kind that you actually touch the ball with your feet more than just one player on the team?
Yes, and the player that no one likes on the team too. Well, there's two players.
No one really likes a quarterback. Like, let's be honest. Nobody likes a quarterback. He's a show-off. He's a big mouth. He's the loudest. Like the quarterback and the kicker are the two most hated player in the team.
Yeah, they take the punter they're okay with because the punter is kind of the geeky of the two kickers. The field goal kicker, a punter can't really lose a game for you, whereas a place kicker they most certainly can and do. So there you go. That's the end of our Gridiron talk for today. Gridiron Radio will return on sometime. One day. I did a couple shows last year.
Yeah, exactly. Just life.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I also, real quickly, if you talk about gridiron football, my alma mater is traveling to Quebec City on Saturday to play the Laval Rouge et Or, which is probably going to be the end of the road for them because Laval's pretty good. But
and the winner goes to the Vanier Cup.
Yes, exactly. And if they make the Vanier Cup, I'll make the truck down to watch Wilfrid Laurier play. I've done it before, so there we go again. But enough of that silliness there, Kevin.
Yes, exactly. We talked about U Sports yesterday. So today we're going to talk about Seattle later with Dave Clark of the original Sound Right Heart. But Duane, a rumor, or it's been reported by Iris Kellersap in the last few hours that Adrian Heath is to be named Minnesota manager?
Yeah, look, obviously Adrian Heath had a lot of success in the USL for Orlando. That franchise then was quite successful and came up and was the original manager of Orlando City in MLS. Lost his job earlier this year based on what I thought were somewhat unrealistic expectations of what Orlando could be. Orlando reminds me a lot of what TFC was in the early years. Orlando fans, if you're listening, that may not cause you too much joy to hear, but certainly the way that there's sort of fear seems like there might be some interference from above. There seems to be these expectations that they're going to reach heights that they can't. It seems to be an impatience around the team, but at any rate, Heath was a victim of that. Look, we heard some more interesting names attached to Minnesota. I heard an interview with Ziggy Schmidt a while ago where he said that he hadn't even been in contact with them. So that's interesting to me. If you're going to go with an MLS retread, why would you go with one that is has very limited sort of success in the league? A guy that struggled to sort of, I think, come to grips with his big name players, his Kaká players in there, and that might signal a couple different things for Minnesota's direction. But before we get into that, real quick thoughts on what you have. Like, I'm surprised by it. I am. That's essentially my initial thought. I have nothing against Adrian Heath as a manager, but I'm not sure he would have been the first person to jump to mind as deserving of a trip back to MLS so quickly. Kevin, your thoughts?
Well, Adrian Heath does have experience launch a quote-unquote an MLS team. Being the coach when the transition happened for Orlando from the USL to MLS, he has experienced that transition, that the hiring of the staff, the building of the club. So he does have some experience building a franchise. That is probably the best reason why Minnesota would go this route is, well, he has experience there. So we can use him at the beginning. Is he the coach that's going to be down the road 2, 3, 4 years? Probably not. If you are hired to build the club, you're not necessarily there to better the club eventually. There's something to build a franchise. It's something else to analyze what you did wrong when you build it and move forward and have a better roster built because of that realization that your first idea, like, you never build a franchise. Let's just take the Jesse Marsh approach. When they hired Jesse Marsh Montreal back in 2012, it was because he had a very high knowledge of the player pool of MLS, of the U23 level of players coming in, and for the draft. So those were the biggest reason why Jesse Marsh was hired by Montreal. I feel it's the same reasoning behind Orlando's potential, Minnesota's potential hire of former Orlando coach Adrian Heath.
Yeah, look, and that's where I kind of question about this. If you really want to go in with the MLS experience angle, then Schmidt's out there. I mean, maybe they have talked to Schmidt, and maybe Schmidt doesn't want to move to the Midwest. Is Minnesota Midwest? I always get that screwed up in my head, whether they're a Midwest city or not. You know, they're in the middle of the country at any rate. They're not exactly on the coast. And Schmidt is, of course, a California guy. Of course, that said, Schmidt also managed in Columbus for a couple of years. So you can't get any more middle America than that, right? So nonetheless, that's kind of my surprise with it, is that there is an absolute obvious option out there if you want to go that angle. Now, the other question around it is whether that angle is even necessary anymore. We look at NYCFC and the experience in their first 2 years. They bring in the guy that pretty much everyone would have assumed was the right choice in terms of price and whether, in his experience in that Major League Soccer, his experience and success in Salt Lake City, and et cetera, and it never really fits. But then they bring in a guy that everyone sort of screams from the rooftops is the wrong pick in Patrick Vieira, and outside of his playoff struggles and his refusal to sort of adjust to MLS playoff changes, which I think it takes every team a year or so to figure that out. He's quite successful in the second year. So maybe that's an illustration, and I've talked about this a lot, and maybe I'm biased towards Vieira. That's possible, but I do think that there is some evidence out there right now that maybe this idea that you have to just retread these same guys in and out from the MLS sort of cycle isn't necessary anymore. And I'm kind of, if this does prove to be true, and Ives has really good sources in the league, so I would suggest that if Ives is suggesting that this will happen, that it probably will. He's not wrong very often, and when he is wrong, it's usually because something changes, which he can't help, right? So I would suggest that this information's good. It surprises me, and I think that it's a pretty overly conservative sort of approach for Minnesota's launch. The other side of this, and this is, I'll get your opinion on this one too, is does this say something about Minnesota's intent? And we've talked to the 55-1 guys about this a few times already, and they seem to be under the same understanding that sort of this implies to me, is that they're going to come in with more of for lack of a better way to put it, Moneyball approach, that they're going to want to have a lot of sort of plumbers, guys that are team players, try to be, more than the greater collection of your parts, that type of concept, rather than bringing in the big names and trying to launch that way. They have an established fan base. They don't necessarily need to make the same big splash that you might in Atlanta, where the Silverbacks didn't really have that much market, exposure, right?
And they've been gone for so long now that it's not been forgotten, but people have moved on from the Silverbacks a long time ago.
Yeah, well, and yeah, they were the Silverbacks. The analogy of the Silverbacks are the Lynx in Toronto, right? Like, people don't barely remember they were there. Like, there's a lot of people that, obviously just look at the crowds in Toronto in the year they launched versus the crowds in the Lynx. You might as well, there wasn't really history there. There was no sense trying to connect yourself at all to that. And I think the same things happened in Atlanta, where they had a very small fan base that wasn't necessarily those guys were going to come regardless. They didn't really need to keep the branding. Is what I'm getting at. That said, I mean, is it the right way to launch? Is launching in Minnesota? So first off, two questions, and I'll ask you this: is hiring a Heath another indication that Minnesota intends to launch small, for lack of a better way to put it, small ball? We'll use baseball terms since we've already used another one. And if that is the case, is that the right approach, Kevin?
Well, they don't want to come into MLS and make a big splash money-wise in a way that would not be necessarily conducive to reality, where even if you get 3 big-name DPs, doesn't mean that you're going to have a successful first season, and financially it might not be worth it for Minnesota to take those risks to start their franchise. They have plans for the stadium eventually and all those. So for the first year, I don't want to call it a soft launch, but by the way they're doing things, they're going to start, they're going to have their first season in the belt and eventually move to their own stadium and maybe then have one bigger name, or maybe they're just going to start to strive in the market slowly next year and have them go all out in a year or two where on the field they will be up to competition for more than maybe a playoff spot. But first year, it's always a little difficult. Very rarely do you see an MLS franchise in their first year actually make the playoffs. Some were close, some did. Very rarely do you see them being successful. So maybe they're just being pragmatic about it.
I suppose, yeah. Look, I look at their temporary stadium's pretty big. They've sold a lot of tickets. I don't necessarily buy that they're poor. Now, the ownership may not have as deep of pockets as other MLS ownership out there. Your AGs, your MLSEs, the big
Saputo,
boys. Yeah, and Saputo too. Although I think that Saputo might be just a little shade below them in terms of his overall wealth, because you're looking at collective big companies, right, that have more security behind them. But nonetheless, I do sometimes wonder whether this idea of the Moneyball approach, we'll call it, and I mean, maybe that's an overused term, but however, whether that is sold to MLS fans as a bill of goods is kind of, I question that, whether it's the right approach anymore, and whether, I think a lot of MLS teams that are from mid-market sized places, although Minnesota's a pretty big city, but flyover country kind of place, where they're sort of sold this idea that this is how we compete, and we're going to show those rich coastal people where it's at, and our thoughtfulness and hard work is going to overcome the money of those elites. That kind of sort of outsider approach, I think that's sold to the fans in that way, and they embrace it because they feel that themselves, as people. And I'm not necessarily sure whether that's always not in the self-interest of the owners when they sell those kind of ideas to the fans, is where I'm getting at. And I'm not too sure, and I say this with Vancouver all the time, that's as a coastal city that I think could deserve to spend more, right? We've had that argument all the time this year, but yet the Whitecaps fans have bought into this idea that they're going to outsmart us all. You don't have to spend the money you do. We're going to outsmart you. But now they're kind of coming around to the idea that maybe we need to spend a little bit more money because we can't just outsmart you. And that's kind of where I come down with this. If in fact Minnesota launches like this, Heath, I don't know if there's enough to get back to him specifically, Kevin. I don't know if there's enough information out there yet to totally know whether he's a good MLS manager. He 1.5 years with an expansion team.
Yeah, he's in the sample size is small for Adrian Heath for Orlando.
Yeah, I mean, we know he's a good manager at the level below, but the level below, when he was in Orlando, they were the LA Galaxy or the TFC, the whoever, the Impact, the Red Bulls, whatever big money team you want to spend at that level, right?
Well, they were literally what the Impact were in the NSL for years. We're a team that you do have a little bit bigger infrastructure, a little more funds, and a better network of contacts that would give you better players at that level that you can take advantage of. MLS is a totally different story.
Yeah, so you're successful at that level, but you were the richest team at that level. So it's really not an example of your ability to do things with smaller players, smaller budgets, because you had a smaller budget compared to MLS, but it's apples to oranges when you're doing those comparisons. When you're apples to apples, you were the rich kid on town. So I don't know. Like I said, I think his sample size is tiny, because it's really 1.5 years with Orlando, and it wasn't particularly successful in that tiny time, but I don't know if that's enough to damn him or to praise him with it. I don't know. It's an I would have preferred some of the other names that were linked to it. I think that bringing in some new voices, some new ideas from outside this league at this point in time is always what I'm going to favor. I've completely come 180 on this must-hire MLS experience sort of stuff, because I think that sometimes it becomes an echo chamber and you need to expand yourself a little bit. And I'm not sure Adrian Heath is the right person to expand ourselves in that regards. Final thoughts, Kevin, before we take a quick break, come back with some bits and bites.
Those MLS lifers that we always talked about need to be the players, not necessarily the coaches, for our franchise or club to start in the right way. So we'll see how that unfolds in Minnesota. But Adrian Heath apparently will be the first head coach.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
The bits and bites on Soccer Today.
Kevin always puts me on mute when I'm on breaks because I'll just start talking to myself sometimes, like I did right there. So there you go.
We were on mute, so only me heard it a little bit.
Yeah, Kevin always the outros one day when we do the best of Canadian soccer news. That's an old one. Best of the soccer today bloopers. Anyway, I promised you a week or so ago that I wouldn't talk politics on this, but we'd focus entirely on soccer to try and provide you with a bit of break. But there is a story today that does tie into the American election that I did want to bring up, because this is something that I thought at the time and sort of brought up at the time, the day after Mr. Trump was elected, that might come into play. And there's a German defender, Marcel Schäfer, that he's from German international, plays for Wolfsburg, he's fairly successful, fairly solid guy at that level, probably could come into this league, so would be 32, 33, as a decent sort of player at the MLS level. Not exactly a game changer, but a guy that I think could have come in and played a role.
Like close to a Laramee type of situation, that type of defender a little bit.
Yeah, so this is absolutely a worthwhile person to consider, and he has a unique hook in that his mother lives in Atlanta. So there's an obvious connection there, and I'm sure based on the fact that he's making statements to ESPN, where he made statements too, indicates that he's probably been in some preliminary discussions with Atlanta to finish his career playing with his mom close by, and that's something you all understand. But he's said to ESPN that he's now reconsidering that move, and he's reconsidering it because he's not sure that the politics that America has embraced right now reflect his values. Now, I am not here to debate what Mr. Trump's politics are right now. I think I'm pretty clearly on record of being a little bit confused by those that do embrace them, but nonetheless, I understand that, Republicans have embraced him as their candidate, and I have no desire whatsoever to get into a partisan conversation. But what I did say a week or so ago is that this is something that legitimately could make it more difficult for DP and TAM level players to be attracted to Major League Soccer, because some of the information, some of the messaging, if you're a partisan Republican out there, just take a step back and listen to this without getting defensive, and try and understand what the messaging would sound like to someone who wasn't an American. And I think you're hearing what that would sound like to someone who's an American. They would reject it. And you can blame whoever you want, but the reality is I think that this is going to be an issue in the next year or so until we really understand what a Trump presidency is going to look like, Kevin.
Yeah, exactly. Because the unknown always scare people, and the fact that nobody knows how is it going to unfold. Is it going to be like he said it's going to be? Is it going to be just business as usual and nobody noticed any difference, or whatever the case may be? Hopefully it's the latter, but we'll see if there's repercussion. We talked about this situation maybe arising where player reconsider their options or coming to play in North America or not. Maybe we have a first case here it'll be interesting to see if he changes his mind too, because sometimes you add a zero and guess what? He doesn't mind anymore. So there's always that aspect to it too.
Yeah, and look, the other area that we're going to have to look at closely and watch closely is how immigration policy changes may affect the ability for foreign workers to get visas in the United States, which directly impacts the ability to attract international players. And this could have could even have impact on our long spoken desire to get Canadians counted as domestics in the United States, and we're still waiting. How long has it been imminent, that announcement, Kevin? I don't know.
A few
5
months
years now?
Yeah, a few years. But it will be interesting though. But to be devil's advocate on that aspect of it, in the world of entertainment, media, and sports, because of the art green card and all that aspect, it's a business. It's an industry that it's easier to become an immigrant worker than other industries, because you do have qualifications that are not necessarily easy to replicate when you're necessarily from the state or outside. So because of that aspect, that's been the visa has been used over the years in many different sphere of the workplace, like art, entertainment, movies, language barriers, people coming in, translators, and sports. Because of some other workers, those are usually the visa that is used, and usually that one is a little easier to get when you're in the sports world, in the media world. So at least for that aspect, if those rules don't change, and they have been like this for decades, maybe it won't be as impactful on the sports level. The other sphere of work in the rest of the world, that's another story. But in the sports/media art world, it's not going to be maybe as impactful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you hope not. And I mean, certainly when you look at, you put MLS in the context of the other professional sports that operate in the United States, primarily the NBA and Major League Baseball and the NFL, obviously, and who am I missing? Oh, hockey, yeah. So those sports have an unlimited amount of foreign workers that you can bring in, and that's MLS could always embrace that, could always eliminate the international spots altogether. It's something they're reluctant to do because of USSF pressure, but certainly if you did that, then that might make things a little less complicated. Getting into labor law stuff is difficult to do without really spending a lot of time on it and like understanding it yourself, study it yourself. I have in the past. It's been a while since I've really dug deep in that world, but again, it's just the one area of this election that I think is going to be initially felt within Major League Soccer circles is right there, what I just spoke up today, that some foreign players may go, you know what, I'd rather go to China, or you know what, I'd rather stay here. And that's their choice. That's their right. So, their livelihood, they can choose to go where they want. If in fact they choose to not go to the United States, there's no one else to, that's their right. They don't have to defend that to anyone or justify it to anyone. So let's move on.
Yeah, Duane, if everybody calls for something, does it mean it's the right thing to do?
Let me just list some publications, and we can try and guess what they've been calling for in recent days. You ready? Okay. Yahoo Sports, Sports Illustrated, ESPN, Fox Sports, SB Nation, USA Today, Vice Sports, Deadspin, 442, Got Soccer, and Metro. All of those publications have called for a certain thing to happen. Can you guess? Well, because it's in the lineup. But would you be able to guess what that call would be, Kevin?
Having read some of those articles, yes, I would be able to guess. Grand Wall started the ball late Tuesday night for Sports Illustrated. People are calling for Jurgen Klinsmann's head, and they're saying that enough is enough, and now's the time to pull the trigger.
Yeah, there's only one publication that has a major soccer component to it, CBCSports.com. They said that he should stay, that they should keep the line, stay patient, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, yeah, you mean the CBS Sports, because CBC Sports would actually probably don't care, but the CBS Sports in the States that has asked for him to stay.
Yeah, that is true. CBC is Canadian Broadcasting. So I wrote CBC in the lineup because that's instinctive for me to do that. So yes, it's CBS Sports. You got me right there. So let's just give a quick count. So right now that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 to 1 for him to go. If he lost 12 to 1, I think he'd probably still stay because The problem, just as you see with any, that's called the USSF, the GM in this case. Anytime you go GM head coach and you fire your head coach, then who's next? Whose head's next in line? The GM, right? And we all know who that is. And I don't think he wants to put his head in line. And if this is the guy that he's put all his cards on. So, hey, I thought it was interesting just to bring up this sheer amount of volume. Now, the question with it I have is how long can that volume be sustained, and how long should it be sustained here? It's not till March until the next international break. Thank God for that, by the way, if you're on the club side of things. But at any rate, I don't know. Like, that might be a good thing for Klinsmann, because if there was another international break coming next month and he didn't get a result next month, and that whole momentum, I think they wouldn't have a choice at that point. But it'll probably calm down before March, because there's a lot more. We got MLS Cup final to talk about. Then we get into the December craziness in England, and then you get back into Champions League coming again. And then by the time the next international break rolls around, you've had a lot of times to distract yourself, and there's another MLS season started by then, right? So there's a lot that will happen before we have to really consider this stuff again, Kevin.
But one of the reasoning behind people asking for his head now, you have the two results of the last international break, the two defeats, 2-1 against Mexico, 4-0 against Costa Rica. It's because you have time now until the next international break to not just have a coach that's decent with some vacancies that will happen in the world of the coaching, but you have time to implement the new way, to have some time to take a look at the players in your roster, to meet them, to see your player pool, your player decision, do I put Redling back in the fold, or whatever the case may be. He has some time, if there's a new manager, to put that into play and maybe be effective in March. If you wait too much, you won't have that time. So maybe that's why as many outlets are asking for his head now, is because they see that if they do it now, they might rescue something that if they don't, they might lose, which is a qualification or just a top spot in the Hags.
Yeah. Real quick message to our Canadian listeners out there, that there are some of them that if he were to lose his job, that would probably start to immediately call for him to be hired by the CSA. You know who you are. Couple things. One, we can't afford him. Two, what the hell are you talking about? Three, what'd you hate Floro for? Playing players out of position all the time, not calling in players that were playing well in Major League Soccer. You're going to have a slicker version of him, is all I'm saying.
You're going to have a nicer dress Benito Floro. But yeah. First of all, can you imagine if he was putting some U.S. men's player under the bus, how he would react after a 4-5-0 of Canada somewhere in the Caribbean? Jurgen Klinsmann would throw the whole country under the bus.
He'd just walk away. Just
He'd be like, nope, damn Canada with your different colored money. I keep forgetting which one is which, and I overtip people, and damn country. That's what he would do if he loses a big game.
Yeah, and for any Americans who are tipping Kevin up here, the pink ones are what you want to give them, right? Or the brown ones too. Pink or brown.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Yeah, pink or brown. None of that green stuff. Pink or brown. That's what you want. All right. Let's move on. Okay. There's this story that won't die that makes me insane. And I'm not going to read how I have it written in the lineup here, but Superliga, the idea of a competition between the Mexican teams and the MLS teams. There's a Mexican site out there that is reporting today that there is talks underway to start a special competition, special tournament between Major League Soccer teams and Mexican teams. So you'd eliminate all those bothersome Costa Rican teams and so on and so forth. I guess probably the Canadian teams would be included in this because we're in Major League Soccer and it would be a league thing rather than a country thing. So we'd be included in this in some regards. But essentially what they're asking or what they're talking about is bringing back Superliga. Now, Kevin, I don't think you were following the league that closely when Superliga existed, were you?
Nope, I wasn't.
All right, let me just tell you then. Superliga was the stupidest thing they've ever done. Well, no, that's not true. The provincial, the Pan-Pacific Championship, that was the stupidest thing they've ever done.
What was that?
That was a competition between the Asian teams, and so it was like the K League, the J League, and MLS, and the A League.
Why not?
So you had Australia, Japan, Korea, and the United States basically in a competition, and it did not go well for the Major League Soccer teams. I remember a J League team. I think it was like the Antlers, was it Keshima Antlers or whatever? Forgive me, am I pronouncing the name of the city wrong? But at any rate, they won like 5-0 against the Houston Dynamo or something. One year they played this thing. It was not pretty, and I don't think Major League Soccer. It wasn't pretty, and no one watched it. So that only lasted a year. Pan Pacific Championship. Look it up if you want. That was the dumbest thing they've ever done. But the second dumbest thing they've ever done is the Superliga, because because you also have the CCL. You're not getting rid of the CCL. I don't think Costa Rica is going to be okay with you just systematically pushing them out of the possibility of qualifying for the Club World Cup, right? So it's not like they're going to lay down. There's still going to be a CCL. So that means that your top teams aren't in this thing, which means your secondary teams are in this thing. And I'm going to tell you a little secret, folks. We aren't as strong as Europe. We don't have room for a Europa League here. All that had happened was essentially you would have these fixtures in the middle of your schedule that no one cared about against Mexican teams, where you just play your kids anyway, and it'd be kids versus kids, and the Mexican teams would still win, and it wasn't pretty at all. And just no, we don't need the damn Superliga back. Just put more money into the CCL.
You know why though? And that comes from a Mexican outlet, Duane, and it's for the Mexican team's benefit. They want to be bigger in the States. They want to create their fan base in the United States, where more money is available for them. Money from the outside is always beneficial for a soccer club because it's somebody outside of your fan base. You just add, you don't subtract anything. So that's one of the reasons why Mexican team or Mexican outlets do want this to be reality again, is for the fringe CCL team in Mexico, or the glories of the past like the Monterrey, will want to create a fan base in the States, and that's one way to do so.
All right. The last item on our Bits and Bites is that Fort Lauderdale forgot to pay their staff again. Take them behind the barn. Do what needs to be done. Kevin?
What's the name of the dog? It's Old Yeller?
Yeah. Sometimes tough decisions have to be made, even though it's painful for all involved. But if you're not paying people, yeah, time to take them behind the barn. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. Kevin and I are going to debate about the greatest city in the world versus Montreal again tomorrow. Mm-hmm.
Fine.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
I feel a little bit better about this one, Duane, because at least our culture hasn't left for Washington, so I don't have that in my mind when I'm trying to talk about a sports city. We have shows in different languages, different cultures, bands from everywhere. Yeah, I'll give it to you. Toronto's art entertainment scene is a lot better than it used to be, but it came from so far away that it's still not up to par.
Oh, yeah, we're debating whether what city has the best arts and entertainment scene, and the Montrealers will love this one, because the Montrealers love to point out all these sort of stereotypes that existed in the 80s and 70s about Toronto, and they completely ignore what Toronto is today when they do this. You know,
I mentioned it, like it's a lot better than it used to be, like a lot,
yeah.
But still. A little.
There was a study a while back where they looked at what city went out more often, like was more likely to have drinks after work and stuff like that. And I'm not going to tell you who won, but you can sort of guess who won that study between Toronto and Montreal.
Well, you know why though? Because they're all stuck in traffic, so they'll wait for like 25 hours.
Can you talk to me about traffic in Montreal?
It's still not Toronto traffic.
Construction's been going on for how long?
Well, I say we're not Boston. Wait, still not that bad. But for Toronto, if you look at what's long time been accused of Toronto is just being another American city with that type of culture. That has changed a lot. But for Montreal, it always has been revered as the European gateway from North America to Europe, to have a melting pot of different vibe, atmosphere. And if you're looking at the entertainment faction, you can actually go to Chinese super shows. You can go to French classical theater, musical nightly. You can find whatever is your fix on the entertainment side. And yes, you can do so the same in Toronto, sure. But the amount of choices that you can have in Montreal is literally too much for one person to handle. There's too many things and you can't choose, and that's life.
Yeah, this is a big city, but look, I it's hard for me to argue that Montreal isn't a fun city, because I degree that it is. I have gone to Montreal my entire life. I remember talking to someone the last time I was in Montreal, which was back in April, but how it just felt like it didn't feel like I was going anywhere anymore. Like, if you know what I mean, like I didn't feel like I was traveling to another city, because it just felt like an extension of my own city of Toronto. It's like Montreal is just that really eastern, your borough of Toronto that I go to every so often, and we go have some fun there. And some people like to have some low class fun in Montreal. If you follow what I mean with that, that's not really my gig, but certainly there's lots of that there. But by and large, the reasons to curtail it up there, the sort of the old Protestant, boring old TO Hogtown stuff, that's long past. And maybe, you know what? I'm not even going to argue right now that Montreal is worse than Toronto. I'm going to argue that Toronto is the same as Montreal now. That these two cities are very vibrant cities and young cities that do like to party. And the only thing that I'll say that Montreal, I think, loses out to Toronto on, Kevin, is that there's this. When I was doing some research this morning for this, and I found like 5 or 6 different Montreal blogs that had these like articles telling us about how they were so much better than Toronto, and I didn't find a single blog or article out there from a Torontonian talking about how they were better than Montreal, because we just don't feel the need to anymore.
Well, at least you don't feel the need to anymore, which used to be the case.
Yeah, and they always, one of the things they always bring up when they're trying to claim that Montreal is a better city, a more entertainment, more vibrant city, is that the Habs are better than the Leafs. Well, no crap.
Everybody knows that.
Everyone's better than the Leafs, but the Leafs aren't really a Toronto team anymore. They're more of a Markham team, more of a Mississauga team, more of a Pickering team nowadays. They're more of a 905 team versus a 416 team. The 416, the rainbow of colors that you see downtown every watching, the Raptors in Maple Leaf Square and all that sort of jazz. That's more of the Toronto that I'm talking about here, the Toronto that goes to the North by Northeast Music Festival, the Toronto that is starting to very slowly and quietly steal Just for Laughs. I don't know if you've noticed that, but Just for Laughs English side of it keeps getting more and more moved to Toronto. The Toronto that has TIFF every year. Not my favorite thing in the year, because it annoys me because I have to go through the traffic on King Street, but it's probably the second biggest film festival in the world. Lots of great stuff here in this city. There are hundreds of restaurants, hundreds of bands. If you want to go to live bands, the Horseshoe, the famous Horseshoe, North by Northeast, I just mentioned there. Obviously, Montreal's got some great stuff going on too, but there's a reason I live there.
We're talking about the biggest quote-unquote indie festival in maybe North America.
You said hipster wrong.
It's fine. Talking about hipsters, you just mentioned Toronto, North by Northwest. You really want to go hipster right there? It's probably the worst. North by Northwest. It's like hipster central. It's where they breed, I think. It's where they become more. No, I think it's a tie on this one. I think on the entertainment value on both sides, you can find whatever you want to find. You can find from the humor to well, we'll talk about restaurant maybe tomorrow, because I have it funny on that one. But if you talk about entertainment and art, it's kind of 50-50 on this one.
Yeah, and I think probably this debate would have been better held between a Montrealer that didn't secretly like Toronto a little bit more than he's supposed to, and a Torontonian that didn't secretly like Montreal more than he's supposed to. I think that would have been a better debate in that case.
I lived in Toronto, so it's hard for me to yes, I do have some experience, so the cliches are not necessarily real in my mind.
Yeah, so and that said, when I'm arriving in Montreal on Tuesday, I'm of course being the great class culture options there. I'm going to, of course, go to the Peel Pub as soon as I arrive, which God help why we still do that.
There's so many nicer places with craft beer and all now. Why are you still going to the Peel Pub?
we're going to Montreal 1978 is where we're doing. We're going to arrive and go to Montreal in a time machine.
Yeah, well, the Peel Pub is not where the same place that it used to be.
No, I remember. I kind of knew that because I've been there. It's blurry. When you go to the Peel Pub, it's usually blurry.
It used to be really blurry because you need to go downstairs, and it was really blurry.
Yeah, no, it's in that little cove of English bars down there that we all hang out in with. So we don't really see that when we go on a Toronto trip. There's not a lot of culture happening. It's like I said, it feels like an extension of Toronto when you go there with a TFC trip. But at any rate, we'll see y'all Tuesday, and we'll see the Montreal guys back here a week from that. Let's take a break. We're going to get Dave Clark on the line and talk about the other playoff series.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more. You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio.
And we are back on Soccer Today. It's with great pleasure that we are joined by the original Sounder at Heart himself, Dave Clark. Dave, how you doing today?
It's a good day.
Dave, I don't think that we anticipated about 3 or 4 months ago that we'd be having this interview on this day. I thought maybe we might be having a conversation about Seattle's, rebuild or off-season moves and so on and so forth. What has the key been, though, in your mind? Is it just single player coming in, Schmidt leaving? Give me your synopsis, your take on why this team turned around.
Well, it took a lot of factors. In some ways, it was essentially a mid-season rebuild. When they fired Siggy Schmidt and went with Brian Schmetzer, that was a significant decision. Bringing in Nicolas Ladero, who looks to be a player that's capable of an MVP caliber performance over a year, is good as well. But they also added some complementary pieces. Ramon Torres back at center back, and he helped secure a defense that through the last days of Siggy Schmidt wasn't doing well. Alvaro Fernandez was added. He has a little bit of creativity and possession in the midfield and some danger on set pieces. And then Nelson Heido Valdez became a player that was worth having on the field in ways that were adding. He wasn't adding goals during regular seasons, but his hold-up play and his ability to help lock down a game as well as pressure was really apparent in that the late portion of the regular season, and then in the playoffs. He's got 2 goals, both of them game winners. So that's obviously his return, or return is the bad word here. His ability to perform to expectation has also been part of the success.
A while back, Alexi Lawless did a sit-down interview with Siggy Schmidt, a very long-form one, which is really worth checking out if you haven't found it on Mutant Gene podcast. But in that, Schmidt sort of indicated that Lodeiro coming in and him not having an opportunity to work with him was the single biggest reason in his mind for the turnaround. And he felt that, obviously he's a proud man and a proud coach. He felt that he would have had the same results. Have there been significant tactical changes, coaching changes that have happened since his departure that really argue against that idea that Schmidt would have done the same thing with Lodeiro in the lineup?
Well, prior to the firing, Siggy had already moved to a 4-2-3-1. That he had mostly played Christian Roldan and Alonso as the holding midfielders in that. So while that has been 100% during Brian Schmetzer's reign as coach, it's something that Schmidt had already moved towards. Siggy, probably the biggest difference is that Schmetzer's version of the 4-2-3-1 is simpler. It's less tactical. It's less flexible. Siggy tried to give players like a Clint Dempsey, or historically he would use a Nico Lodeiro in a very free role. Think back to Barro Scoletto or Freddie Montero or Freddie Ljungberg or Clint Dempsey. He's let that caliber of talent just do what they want. And it's a little bit more, Nico is a little bit more contained in this, although he is in the driver's seat. The biggest difference, though, is the attitude the players have put forward. If you look in the last few weeks of Siggy's tenure here, Tyrone Mears had clearly quit on the team. A couple other players looked less responsive. There were rumors that Clint Dempsey didn't talk to Siggy anymore. And one of the things that Brian Schmetzer has done is he has placed the onus on the players. He regularly and repeatedly states things like, if you win, it's on you. If you lose, it's on me. That he's trying to get the players to own their own performances. And they're doing it. They're both different versions of a player's coach. If you talk to players that played for Siggy Schmidt after they've had a long career, they'll always say he was one of the best coaches I've ever had, or the best coach I've ever had. He looked out what was for best for me. Maybe I didn't know it at the time. Look at Hercules Gomez and that conflict that he had with Siggy when Siggy tried to steer him away from playing that in a lower division and to test himself at a higher capability. Herc didn't really respond well to that conversation for 10 years. They kind of had this antipathy between the two of them. But later, Herc admitted that Siggy was right. It was best for my career to test myself and to continue playing at the highest level possible. And that's kind of a pattern over Schmidt. Whereas right now, people love playing for Brian Schmetzer. He gets player buy-in. And when the margins are so tight in MLS, we're used to parity. We're used to seeing that. If you can get 1% more out of a guy because he enjoys the coach, that's enough to change the tides in this league.
You mentioned Clint Dempsey. That's the unfortunate situation with Clint Dempsey's health. Was it a catalyst day for the Seattle Sounders? Was it one of the the tipping point that made this group of players bond together and able to play together in a way that wasn't seen before this season?
I've actually argued that there has been a little bit of an effect from the players in that they can't just stand around and watch Clint Dempsey do what Clint Dempsey does. They have to find ways to perform themselves. And you can look at that throughout sports. That the nickname for it, I guess, is the Ewing effect. But I think, you look at Michael Jordan basketball when he played, his teammates had an annoying habit of just watching him rather than playing the game. And there were times, particularly when it was Clint Dempsey and Olafemi Martins, that the other 8 outfield players didn't really have a whole lot to do. And sometimes they'd fade out of games. Without having Clint around, they know that they have, at worst, they can be at 95% of their game if they want to win. And so that's keeping them on a mental edge at all times because they don't have as many bodies out there that are game changers.
Now, heading into the Western Conference Final, Seattle is the underdog against Colorado, the second-seeded team, but they're going to be missing Tim Howard. How will Seattle be able to take advantage of a Zach McMath that comes back in front of the net after a few months off?
I think the key is one, McMath had a very good year. And in some ways, I wish I could have voted for him for Keeper of the Year because I thought that he had a stronger performance in his half season than Tim Howard did. But with a young keeper, and particularly one with a multi-year history of significant gaps, there's a chance that he'll make one of those in a high-pressure game. You also don't have the stability and leadership that a Tim Howard provides. And one of the ways that you do that is create unique attacking angles, pull a defender out by maybe having a Jordan Morris when he accepts the ball rather than try to hold up or go in on goal. If he pulls out, all of a sudden that center back is going to come forward. McMath's going to have to try to command that line that is no longer a straight line, and that's where his inexperience and his lack of playing in pressure situations could come to haunt him. So it's things like that Seattle will have to do, challenge his ability to be a leader, because it's also a pretty young back line.
Dave, I want to turn our attention to a young man that a lot of people have talked a lot about this year, and that, of course, is the Rookie of the Year, Jordan Morris. He seems to have grown into his role as the season has continued, and I'm just wondering if you could sort of talk about his growth and compare and contrast him to where he was at the start of the year.
He went through a couple of phases this year. Early on, he was just a guy that they would try to make him run onto the ball and have things happen. What we discovered is that as teams adapted to him, he added new things to his game. He became a better passer. You've seen that a little bit in the playoffs. Teams obviously know that he's mostly a right-footed player, so now he's scoring with his left foot. He did that late in the season. He's scoring with his head, which is something that was lacking in his game as well. But mostly what you're seeing is his understanding of space and relationship with his teammates. He's mostly, at this time, the lone center forward, although he's played a little bit of left wing lately. Both of those give him different opportunities. His hold-up play is strong, but when he's out wide, what he can do with the ball at his feet is he's one of those players that has game-changing speed. And so if the opponent backs off of him, he knows enough now that he can start charging towards goal, and that he keeps his head up. He's looking to either pass or shoot based off of what's the best available. And some of it is just that he never wore down. And that's something that when you look at attacking players in the league, normally after about 25 games or so, their legs go out. And we never saw that with Jordan. He continued to perform at a high level. He continues to be a player who is on the fringe of the U.S. national team picture. When not injured, he probably would have been called up for these last two games. So he's as talented as the hype said. He has more goals than any other rookie, American rookie in league history, and only Kyle Laramee did better. So at this point, it's hard to say that he failed to live up to his hype. But I think what you saw from Jordan Morris was a player who matured over the season and showed that the hype from the last offseason was all justified.
Fair enough. The most goals by an American rookie, they like to point out on the MLSsoccer.com, which is true. Kyle Laramee just nudged him out on North America. Yeah, just had to point it out. You know where I'm from. Anyway, let's go a different angle though here. I like to ask this of people when I'm having a preview in a series. You of course are in Seattle, so I'm going to ask you to put yourself in the minds of the Colorado team and tell me how Colorado beats Seattle in this series.
I think Colorado's actually kind of built well to beat Seattle, even without Gashi or Howard. Colorado's success is all about their three-man midfield: Cronin, Jermaine Jones, and former Sounder Michael Azira. In run of play, those three are very difficult to go through. And Seattle, with Nico Lodeiro as the central midfielder, Osvaldo Alonso and Christian Roldan are also difficult to go through. But that's where it's going to be that's where this game is going to be made or broken. And I think Colorado's built well for it because Seattle is going to have difficulty. They don't have good wingers. And so if forced to depend on a Tyrone Mears and an Alvaro Fernandez and Andres Ivanchik and a Jovan Jones, Seattle's very beatable. And Seattle can depend on Alonso, Ladero, Roldan, and Morris. They're not really beatable. And so I think Colorado's built well for that. The other thing that Seattle's done very well this year that Colorado's also built well against is set piece success. Somewhere around, I think it's about 38% or something around there of Seattle's goals this year have come on set pieces. Colorado's backline is enormous. They have the 3 largest non-keeping players in the league. They're very successful at stopping set pieces. They have, Mark Birch, their left back, another former Sounder, is like 6'4" and 6'5", and most teams don't have center backs at that height. So on set pieces, they do a very good job, and so Seattle's backup plan isn't going to be great. That's why Colorado's made it this far. I think that they're a team, unlike Dallas and unlike Kansas City, that is built to match up with Seattle's strengths. And there's a reason why Colorado had the second best record in the league, and it's not because they just got lucky. They're built around a defense first, and their defense is right up the spine. They're forcing players outside to feed in crosses against the tall head of Soyberg. It's just not going to work. And Seattle can't play that game. So it's going to be low scoring. As a Seattle fan, I'm confident in the Sounders' ability to adapt. But if I was the Rapids, I think that they can come to Seattle and shut out the Sounders. So 0-0 for Colorado in the first leg is a huge win. And everything about their roster and their expected lineup says that they should be able to do that.
If you're looking at the players for the Sounders, we talked about Jordan Morris, but one player that I think we need to talk about more is Nico Lodero. His impact on the club has changed this season, literally, of the Sounders. What makes Nicolas Lodero such an efficient and influential player for the Seattle Sounders, Dave?
There's a couple of things that he does at a level that aren't typical in MLS. Though he plays as the number 10, his defensive effort and responsibilities are great. Like what he does when Seattle doesn't have possession is something that is often overlooked. But in many ways, what it enables the Sounders to do is pressure higher up the field and create turnovers in spaces where they're more likely to score. And when you have Nico Lodero pressing high, forcing bad passes, and an Alonso and Roldan running around another layer deep, those poor passes are likely to be picked up by Seattle. So what he does defensively is extraordinarily important. It kind of completes the team, and he is the one that decides when Seattle will press high or not. So that's important. Offensively, he's everything that you expect out of an Argentine or Uruguayan player. He's great with the ball at his feet. He's nifty. He's technical. He moves well and fast. He's young, so he's willing to put in those miles. He's not taking it easy. He might be the second coming of a Javi Morales or a Barros Scaletta, but he's coming here 3, 4, 5 years younger than they did, and his ability to put the ball on frame is strong. He's the type that could challenge in a full season for 10 goals and 20 assists. That's the type of work and strength that he puts in. It's hard to not praise him too much. He's going to be the newcomer. Well, he's on the short list for the newcomer of the year. You can argue that he wasn't here long enough, but again, he's a player that with a full season will show up on the short list for MVPs. I mean, when we're all looking at preseason 2017, and the Seattle Sounders are going to have a player back on the projected MVP list, and is a Uruguayan that's going to only be 28. That's rather important, and that's fairly impressive.
I'm not sure about that. He's not in New York, Dave. That's a little bit of a dig against this particular year's MVP vote, but at any rate, About 5 years ago, Dave, I had a very vivid dream, and I remember it well to this point. And it was this is the height of TFC's despair, when they were at their absolute low point. I had a dream that I was at the MLS Cup final in Toronto with Toronto playing, and the team they were playing was wearing, well, rave green jerseys. Didn't say Seattle for sure, but it seemed like it to me at the time. So we're getting awful close to that possibility, although I'm sure you're cheering for the Impact so that you have the chance to host that game, Dave.
Yeah, we're clearly cheering for the Impact. One of the great things is, Montreal is going to get, 60,000? TFC will get their 30 with the new stadium. Seattle, might be poor.
35 people, 35, yeah.
Yeah, we might only get 42,000 for leg one. But, you look at it, those three markets have great support for the league and for the local sport, and there's some extraordinary players that are easy to sell, whether you're in the U.S. or Canada. I think I would love to have an MLS Cup here. The last one we watched here was a fun show, kind of, but it didn't involve the local team because that was back with the purchased hosting rights. But Seattle actually had people show up for it. I think that they'd probably be able to get 60 for an MLS Cup, and I think that would be a fun story. Plus, it's if you're looking at narrative, Seattle having very high expectations to start the season, firing the winningest coach in league history, hiring the loyal man who has been a Sounder since 1980, born and raised here, and then going on to a Cup final. That's a hell of a story. I mean, it's kind of cheesy Disney-esque stuff that probably wouldn't sell in the movie theaters these days, but it would definitely sell tickets and create a storyline here.
For sure. All four teams actually have a great storyline. The rags to riches TFC, well, the rich rags to riches rich. Montreal with Drogba's last game. We've got Colorado, which is the ultimate underdog story, and you just mentioned Seattle. Dave, we thank you for your time. As always, we're a little tight on time today. Maybe we'll touch base again in that MLS Cup build-up. Certainly we'll touch base again down the line regardless. Thanks again, Dave Clark, Sounder at Heart. Thanks.
My pleasure, guys.
And until next time on SPN Radio, tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. for Soccer Today. Have a great soccer. You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.